So one thing that comes to my mind here talking about investing and genetics is there's an interview that I saw a couple of years ago, and it was by the famous journalist Charlie Rose. He was interviewing a very famous value investor called Seth Klarman. And basically the journalist asked the famous American billionaire value investor, so why do you think that you became a value investor? And he thought about it and said, well, maybe it's in my genes. So you can sort of view what we have done in our research study as being inspired by that statement. However, that said, it has actually very solid scientific grounding as well, what we have been doing here, because in the last 5 to 10 years, there's a lot of research that has come out in finance and in economics, some of it being my previous research, that has shown that how we invest our money, for example, how much risk we take, that is to some extent explained by our genes. So think about yourself. So how much risk do you like to take? What is your risk appetite? Think about your family, think about your friends. Some people like to take a lot of risk, and some other people, they do not like to take a lot of risk. They want to invest all their money in bonds or hold it in a bank account. And what has been found in the last couple of years is that this risk-taking propensity actually has a genetic root. And so you can see this paper that we have done here now, that is sort of an extension of this past research related to genetics and financial decision-making. So one way to study the effect of genetics on investment behavior is to look at twins. So that's what we have done in our paper. You need data on the investment behavior both of identical twins and also non-identical or fraternal twins. So I have a graph here that I will show. It sort of represents how to think about the results that we have provided in our study. So basically, the way you do this research is quite simple. You compare the similarity of identical twins. So basically, you compute the correlation with respect to the investment behavior among identical twins. And then you do the same thing, but you do that for non-identical twins or fraternal twins. And then you compare the correlations. So as you can see in this graph, there is much stronger correlation, much stronger similarity among identical twins compared to the fraternal twins. So this is a very strong indication that, at least in part, the value versus growth investment style that has a genetic root. So of course genes doesn't explain everything. So genes is an important determinant of value versus growth investment style, but it's not the only factor. And so we decided to look at a couple of other factors as well. And here we were inspired by Benjamin Graham. So Benjamin Graham is a very famous value investor. Some would refer to him as the father of value investing. And so I was quite intrigued when I read about his upbringing. So Benjamin Graham grew up quite poor. His father passed away when he was very young. His mother lost the family savings in the panic of 1907. And he had a couple of siblings. But Benjamin Graham was tasked among the siblings to go to different grocery stores in New York City and look for bargains. So he was a bargain hunter when he was a little kid. And it struck me as very interesting because when I think about famous value investors, I think about them as bargain hunters. I think about Warren Buffett in the financial crisis buying Goldman Sachs at a bargain price. So this was sort of one source of inspiration for the factors that we analyzed. So what we find is that we looked at different life experiences that people have, and then we linked that to their investment style. And what we found were a couple of different things. So those that grew up during the Great Depression, those had a stronger tendency to become value investors and sort of bargain hunters. Those that entered the job market for the very first time, got their very first job in sort of economic downturn, those were also more likely to become value investors. And then the last thing that we looked at is, if you grew up poor, like Benjamin Graham did, then we found that those who grew up poor in our data set, they were also much more likely to become value investors. So it's not only about the genes, but there's also these different life experiences that you have. They also explain ultimately what style that you will pursue. So I think that there are many different implications from our research. So let me just focus on one. So there are many value funds out there. We counted this and we found about 2,050 different value funds with the word value in the name of the fund. And there's even more growth funds. So it's about 3,200 growth funds that we found. So if you're running one of these funds, what can you learn from our research? So, well, we know from our research that some people are more attracted to value versus growth. And so who is it that is more attracted to value? Well, it would be those that had tougher times when they grew up. They entered the job market in a difficult time, and they were sort of shaped by these defining years in their lives. So if you can identify people on these dimensions, then you will find sort of some of your potential clients that can be more attracted to those type of funds, the value funds. So to summarize what our research is about, basically we look at the investment style, and some investors are more value-oriented and some are more growth-oriented in terms of their style. And we look at why that is the case. And we find there's two different determinants. Number one, genes. So your genetic makeup, what you're born with, that will determine to some extent if you prefer value versus growth. And then also, secondly, what are the life experiences that you've had? So if you've had more tougher times that you've gone throughout your life, you're much more likely to become a value investor. That's basically what we find.